Hi, everyone. My name is John Coughlin. I'm on the community relations team at GitLab and really happy to be here today for this virtual meetup. Before we get started, I always like to start our meetups by sharing our code of conduct with everyone. In the Zoom chat, which is at the bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll see a chat bubble. And if you open that, you'll be able to click through to our code of conduct. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I want everyone to know that, at GitLab, we really value creating a safe, welcoming, and inclusive environment. And so if you have any concerns or want to report any violations of our code of conduct, please do let me know. You can do that by emailing evangelist@gitlab.com, which I'm going to also put in the chat, or you can send me a direct message in the Zoom chat. So you just click the caret next to everyone, scroll to find my name, and you can send me a DM. And we can make sure that we resolve any concerns that you have. With that said, thanks everyone for joining us. Really excited to be here with you today. For folks that are new to GitLab, I'll just give a quick overview. GitLab is a complete DevOps platform delivered as a single application. So there's lots of great benefits. We have one interface, everything happens in one conversation. There's one permission model, and included in that kind of platform, we have thousands of features. We release every month on the 22nd, so the product is always improving. GitLab's an open core company, so we have a free open source version that everyone can use and everyone can contribute to. And then there's also kind of enterprise levels that people who need more functionality can use. GitLab's the largest all remote company in the world, which is really cool, or at least we were until COVID started. There may be more larger all remote companies right now, but we've been the largest all remote company for a while, and it's part of our DNA, and it's something that's really interesting about us. And another thing that's cool about GitLab, I love to talk about our handbook and transparency. So GitLab, one of our values is transparency. That includes publishing our handbook, which is kind of like everything that we use to run our business. And so you can search Google for GitLab handbook and kind of read about everything that everybody on this call does, because we all, kind of keep the handbook up to date and share, how we work and what we work on. So if you're interested in learning more about GitLab, I think that's a great place to start. So with all that said, really excited to have this group here today. This is a panel discussion that's going to be facilitated by Ray, and I'll let him do introductions of all of our speakers. So Ray, why don't you take it away?
Cool. Thanks, John. And I'm going to share my screen. I got a few slides that I want to go over before I start talking to the panel members. Let me make sure people can see the slides. Give me a thumbs up. Cool. All right. So yeah, again, my name is Ray Paik. I work with the code contributor community. I've been at GitLab for the past 2 years, and I've been wanting to do this. I've been working with a great group of people at GitLab engineering team that actually make community contribution possible. I mean, we celebrate a couple of milestones. In the past few months, we surpassed 3,000 contributors in the history of the company a few months ago. And then for 13.1 release, we actually have over 300 MRs merged. And it's not possible if we don't have people like the panelists here that aren't, reviewing and working with the community members. And the other thing I wanted to add, like logistics wise, like I definitely want to hear like a questions from the participants. So if you want to type in any questions from on the Zoom chat, like we'll monitor that, and like hopefully we'll have some time towards the end to answer some of your questions. In terms of introduction, I'm gonna turn things over to the panelists. So we'll go according to the order that people listed on the slides. Like Carrie, if you want to like briefly introduce yourself, and we'll end it with Steve, and then I'll share a couple more slides. Carrie, like.
Sure. Hi, I'm Carrie Miller. I'm a senior backend engineer on the source code team. I'm based out of Seattle, Washington, and I've been at GitLab for about 1.5 years now.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm a backend engineer in Verify CI, and I am based in New York City.
Hey, I'm Paul Slaughter. I'm a front-end engineer at GitLab. Been here for a little over 2 years. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Steve. I'm from Malta, which is a tiny island in Europe. I've been at GitLab for 2 years and a bit more, and I work on the GitLab runner.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. So just a couple more slides. Hopefully I won't bore people too much, but just want to set some context. I mean, this slide you'll find on the main contribute page that we have. Over the past few years, we've seen both number of contributors and the number of MRs getting merged increase. We almost doubled the number of contributors between 2018 and 2019. And one of the things that I've worried about from time to time was that as the volumes increase, are we going to able to process these volume of contributions? And also at the same time, I think Paul and I started at GitLab around the same time, a little over 2 years ago, and Steve, you too as well. I think the number of engineers probably tripled over the past few years. And as new people come on board, it takes a little while for people to get going and get familiar with the workflow. And I wasn't sure how that on-ramp was going to happen in terms of community contributions. But we've done quite well, as you can see in the next slide. This is one of the metrics that I look at from time to time. This is sort of the median time it takes for MRs to get merged. And one of the things I keep an eye on is that, are we staying below 5 days or less? Are half the MRs getting merged within 5 days? And I think the number has been pretty astonishing. Over the past 15 months or so, we had a couple of times when we went over the 5 days that I sort of look at. And I think the one for 12.9 is, this is when the shelter in place started in many places around the world. So people's work and life got disrupted. And then we came back down to a little over 3 days. And then I think 13.1, this is when we had the huge volume MRs that come in. So this is sort of natural. And I really appreciate all the work that reviewers are doing to make sure that we're responsive. Yeah, I just wanted to quickly share that data. I think that shows the amount of effort that everybody puts in terms of being responsive and helping community members. And the feedback that I get from people is that they not only appreciate the fact that people get their MRs merged, but they feel like they're collaborating with the GitLab team members, and they get to learn a lot about the GitLab product, the architecture, and in terms of they get a better understanding of why we even things like the coding style, why we do at GitLab the things we do. If you're lucky enough to have your MRs reviewed by Paul Slaughter, you'll get, when your MRs merge, you get a nice celebratory animated GIFs. And the question I want to ask you, Paul, was that, where do you find these GIFs? Because I don't think you recycle any of them at all.
Yeah, I have a bookmark folder titled GIFs, and
okay.
If anyone ever has cool, looks good to me GIFs, send it my way, because I feel like I am running out of them. I have 20 that I try to shuffle to make it look like I don't recycle them, but
Okay.
yeah, no, that's something I pick up some habits I see other people do in code reviews on other projects, and that kind of personal touch has meant a lot to me receiving it. Yeah, I appreciate you giving me a good feedback for that too.
Yeah, I mean, I try to read through all the community contributions that comes through. I look forward to yours before it gets merged, because I get to see a nice GIF. First question, Laura, if you don't mind, I'll ask you. I mean, you recently joined as an MR coach, but before joining GitLab, I mean, have you contributed to other open source projects, or do you also contribute to other open source projects today while you're still at GitLab?
Yeah, so I did not. I was always pretty intimidated by contributing, to open source, especially because the first project someone suggested I contribute to was Rails. So I thought you had to be a super expert. Just like everyone, I suffered from imposter syndrome. But ever since joining GitLab, I realized that it was all in my head. Everyone I work with is kind, helpful, generally wants me to succeed. Yeah, I would encourage other people to do the same.
Cool. So what's been like as a reviewer? Like, I mean, you didn't necessarily have a lot of experience, like contributing to other projects, but how did you sort of come up to speed in terms of, working with community members and providing feedback when people submit their MRs?
Yeah, well, I guess I learned how to review through other code reviews. I did a switch from front end to back end, and I have to say I learned a lot from Paul's sort of like guideline to how to do code reviews, which I would encourage you guys to check out. Paul, if you want to share that link at some point. And yeah, I mean, just through code reviews, I learned how to do code reviews while always keeping in mind, that people are doing the best they can with the information they had at the time. And we have a lot of, really good guidelines in the handbook as well.
So Steve, I'll ask the same question to you. I think you contributed to other projects before you came to GitLab. Like, have you learned from contributing to other projects, or, do you also contribute to other open source projects today?
Yeah, so before I actually joined GitLab, I used to contribute to some projects within the community, and I learned a lot from there as well. Mostly the way to communicate and the way to respect one another, especially since you're complete strangers to one another over the internet. And I still contribute from time to time. And like now that I work at GitLab and I review community contribution, I have more empathy to maintainers. And I also understand more the effort that goes into, and like, even if I see something that I felt, oh, this was a really nice experience from my end, like I try to understand why it was a nice experience, because I always want to feel other community contributors at GitLab to feel the same way I did at other projects. So yeah.
Cool. Great. So were you able to also, learn from experience of as a contributor, like getting your contributions reviewed, and like I'm guessing you contributed to like Golang and other communities, but.
I think I learned a lot from that perspective. One of the biggest thing I've learned is giving feedback quick and early, and try to be transparent as possible. Like, even if it's just a one-line sentence acknowledging that you're seeing this merge request and you're reviewing it, or you're not understanding something, that goes a long way than just radio silence and just trying to just wait until someone picks up the merge request.
All right, cool. And Steve, if you don't mind, I'll stay with you with the next question as well. I know like you have a regular workload of you have like a development that you need to do for like upcoming milestones. So do you set aside time separately for reviewing MRs from the wider community versus MRs from your colleagues on the runner team, or how do you sort of organize your work so that you have time for reviewing community contributions?
Yeah, so I do. Luckily, we have an agreement with my manager. Like, the whole team is to have 20% of our time working on community contributions, and that means 20% is like a whole day, right? So I made it as a routine for myself, because I love routines, to Friday be community contribution days. So every Friday, I just spend all day reviewing community contribution codes, proposals, and so on and so forth. And that gives me like a nice cadence, and something that community contributors get used to, right? So every Friday I'm going to get a review from Steve, or every Friday I'm going to get some comments from Steve, because they are reviewing my merge request at the moment. So it provides some kind of predictability from my end and from their end as well.
Cool. Yeah, I thought that was like a pretty ambitious goal. I definitely see a lot more emails from you, Steve, with commenting on MRs, and not just you, but other colleagues have set a pretty high bar in terms of allocating time for this that I've been impressed with. So Carrie, what about you? How do you like organize your day or your week so that you have bandwidth to look at contributions from the wider community?
I'm probably just sort of echo Steve's comments there, in that for me, I don't have as much throughput on those that come in to me. but I generally tend to prioritize them. They take a little bit longer because there's more to talk about, and I have to do a bit more communicating around, again, around teaching what our concerns are and explaining them and communicating those sorts of things. But I do like to prioritize them because in GitLab, we are all very used to working remotely and asynchronously. And I know if somebody comes to me for code review internally, that is the thing that they are working on. It's a deliverable. They have deadlines. Somebody who coming into the community, who knows when they're working on that? If it's like during their workday or their evenings or their weekends. I want to be as responsive so that they're able to then, whenever they have that time that they're taking for participating in our community, I want them to see that it's priority for us. So I tend to prioritize those that come in and try to get to them as quickly as can.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I think I remember, like, not long after you joined, I think, Carrie, you pinged me and you were impressed with like the quality of the work that we're getting from the community members. So I appreciate you like reaching out to me. So that was pretty cool. And then, I mean, you were relatively new to GitLab and you were already reviewing community contribution, which was awesome. And I mean, you brought up something that I wanted to ask. I'll start with you, Paul. In terms of reviewing MRs, like, do you approach like reviewing community contributions differently than you do from our team members at GitLab? Like when the MR comes in, like, I mean, do you do anything really different, or like do you take a different approach in terms of looking at MRs?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
I thought about it. For me personally, there's not a huge difference. I mean, one of our GitLab mottos is everyone can contribute. So whether I get an email from a team or pinged by a team member or someone outside our team, I mean, we're all contributors. So for me personally, I try to treat it with our community contributors as just really valued team members at that same level. I may test things manually more often because I know that they may not have the same like GDK setup that we do, and we have some more support there. But yeah, for me, when I look back at some of the community contribution MRs, comparing it to team member MRs, we're all contributors, so it's very much the same.
Cool, thanks. Laura, what about you? I mean, you recently transitioned from front end to back end. I don't know if you like, do more testing like Paul said, or do you do anything differently when you're looking at MRs from the community members versus team members?
Yeah, I guess just like Paul, everyone can contribute. So, I try to treat it the same. But also I know that their contributors don't work in the GitLab code base every day, and they may not be familiar with some patterns or specific ways we do things. So I just always try to be cognizant of that when I'm reviewing, and I try to be very detailed, just because I know that if I'm reviewing a GitLabers MR, there may be some assumptions that I know they know, and yeah, just try to make it an opportunity to learn.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's one of the feedback I got from one of the contributors. I think one of the MRs didn't end up getting merged for one reason or another. I can't remember the details, but what he told me was that he still learned a lot. Like, I mean, he didn't really care what the MR was merging up, but he learned about how, he needs to write better code, if something that needs to get merged in MR, and he learned more about the product. So he didn't feel like that was like a waste of his time. So he really appreciated a lot of detailed feedback. And I think, unfortunately, what happens in some community is that you submit an MR, it feels like you're throwing stuff over the wall, and then maybe you'll get merged at some point. But usually, like, the reviewers are very responsive, and then they're surprised at the amount of detailed feedback they get. So I think what you just said there, Laura, it's a proof point of that person's testimony. And Steve, I'll next question is for you. I mean, I think like what I've learned, like working with the runner team, is that I think for a runner particularly, sometimes it takes like a really long time for you to even like review an MR, because you need to understand the the context better. I think you told me that one of the MRs, it took you like 6 hours to provide detailed feedback on. What are some of the tips that you want to provide to wider community members on writing good MRs? I mean, what are some of the things that you want to suggest so that it sort of not only increases the likelihood of that getting merged, but also expedites the review process?
That is one of like the biggest time sinks that we got on the runner team, and mostly because the runner can run on any system through any setup and so on and so forth. So some things might take differently if you run it on Linux, on a VM, or inside of a container, right? So I think the biggest thing that people can help us with, like for a quick merge request, is either like some test scripts that we can run to reproduce the fix and reproduce the issue, or like, hey, just copy paste this GitLab CI YAML file and run it, and it should work. Before it didn't, like provides kind of an instruction manual on how to run it, and that's because sometimes, like for example, it's very a weird edge case, like that 6 hour one, for example, is regarding uploading artifacts on a Windows machine that had Japanese characters turned on. Like I do not know that. Like I had to set up a Windows machine to actually understand. Okay, is this fix actually fixing things, and is this breaking things, or is there a better way to fix it? Because sometimes it's not the contributor's fault at all. Sometimes they're just their main goal is to fix an issue they were having, right? So they're just going to do that. But our main goal as a maintainer of a project is to fix the issue, but not break anything else, and make sure that fix is in a maintainable way that it will not break in the future again. So I think a way, providing some context, like why are you doing this fix and how you're testing this fix, might be really, really helpful. And sometimes like seeing unit tests is always awesome, because it provides me like a reproducible way to just test it. And yeah, like if you can provide also, hey, I'm doing this feature because I want X. Now, when I want X, like what problem is it going to solve for you? Like computer science, there's the XY problem. Most people say, I want to fix this because I want to enable myself to do something else. But sometimes like the problem that you're trying to fix can be fixed in a different way. And like if you provide the context why you're fixing this problem and what is it going to enable you, it might help out. Oh, the maintainer, we are already working on this in this way with this specific case and things like that. So it might also help out quickly resolving the problem as well.
Well, Laura, anything else you want to add there? Like in terms of like any suggestions that you have for contributors as they write MRs?
Yeah, I guess you mentioned, the description, sorry. But I guess I can think of like 3 things. One is, even though it might sound trivial, a good description is always really important. Like you say, why this MR is necessary, how to test it, especially how to test it, because, I'm in the verified team, and if I get an MR from another team, it's just easier for me to know exactly where to go. Second one is always include tests. We like it. We like our code tested. And the third one is just don't be shy about asking questions. We always review things with, no judgment and assumptions that everyone's trying to their best. And, contributing to GitLab is a great way to get some mentorship. So, why not ask questions? We have some awesome engineers, so it's a great chance to, do some knowledge sharing there.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that's a great reminder. I mean, I actually talked to like a few students that are still in universities in a couple of countries, and they weren't sure whether it's okay to like ping somebody at GitLab. And I said, sure. I mean, if somebody like opened an issue, if you want to ask about that, it's a completely fair game. It's a reminder that I like to give. Like, don't be afraid of doing that. And we're GitLab team members, but before that, we're also community members as well. So we owe it to other community members to be responsive. So I mean, it's a great reminder. The next question, I mean, I think I mentioned this early on when I was sharing the slides. how our engineering teams have grown, particularly over the past few years, and especially with the new engineers. I sometimes I get a ping on Slack and ask about guidance in terms of working with community members, which is great to see, because they're eager to work with community members. They're looking for guidance. I mean, Carrie, I'll start with you. If somebody just joined the GitLab engineering team, I mean, are there any suggestions or advice you would give to new engineers that are starting to work with a lot of community members? What kind of tips, advice that you want to share?
Yeah, I think that the biggest one for me, whenever I've been working with community members, and I have a lot of experience working on open source projects, it's always to come back to the idea that people are contributing. And so we want to encourage their enthusiasm and their participation, right? So if you get especially large MR, for example, and there's a lot of we could be nitpicky sometimes around our code style, but it's very important because of the demands of our product. So how do we communicate that to somebody without completely ruining their day or making them feel defeated, or oh gosh, I've already put 10 hours into this and now she's asking me to do another 5 hours of just clean up, and they might just drift off and wander off, and that MR never comes back to us and gets finished. So it's just trying to continue to foster that sense of participation and enthusiasm that propelled this person to scratch that itch and make that feature that they wanted to see or fix that bug that they found. How do we encourage that? So staying positive and on that contributor side.
Well, Paul, I wanted to ask if you have anything to add. I mean, the one popular question I get is the MR, it just isn't in a good shape, so they want to a closey MR, and they're really reluctant to do it because they don't want to discourage the contributors. But Paul, I don't know if you have any thoughts there or any other tips that you want to share with other GitLab team members.
No, Carrie is 100% on point. I think all of the conversation we give to community members is peppered with so much gratitude because we realize they're contributing, and this is part of what makes GitLab really special, and that's just so valuable. Yeah, I would. There's definitely some cases where someone's worked hard on something, we end up having to close it, and the only time I've seen that is less because the code is in a bad shape. That's should almost never be a reason. Usually we close it because this isn't actually the way we're solving the wrong problem. And so going back to the previous question of talking about contributors opening MRs that want to get merged, making sure that just pinging coaches on as early as possible about, hey, I'm planning on doing things in this way, and just getting that early feedback on, do we have the requirements fleshed out, can help alleviate that a lot. Talking about reviewers reviewing MRs, it's so encouraging, and I think we have something special going on when contributors say they feel like they're getting mentored. They feel like even if I close the MR, something good came out of it. It's okay to ask for changes, and I think that that's actually received really positively from community contributors. And that's something I've seen from newer reviewers feel uncomfortable asking for changes. I think there's a lot of power though in the way you ask it. If I just say, hey, this class doesn't look good, change it. That's going to be the most discouraging, I'm not going to expect a lot of feedback on that MR. But if I can take this as maybe a mentorship opportunity, I can explain, hey, here's why. And then I try to communicate a lot with patches, because every comment I leave to community contributor, I want it to get merged as soon as possible. So I even show, here's the code how I would do it. But feel free to change it however you want to. So leaving really actionable comments is huge, where here's a patch, or even I like to ask them questions and say, because I feel like we're all contributors. So even though I'm a GitLab team member, there's a lot of co-ownership here. So how would you approach this problem? Because this does have issues. So leaving actionable comments rather than just, this isn't right, change it. That's trying to perceive what is the reader going to do when they read this, and do they have enough information to go forward? That's been huge. Yeah. So I would encourage reviewers not to be courageous asking for changes, but also make sure that every request has a clear action to it. And sometimes you gotta just get your hands in the code and start collaborating on it, which is really cool.
Yeah, one thing I would like to add, if it's possible, something that Kara mentioned is like you provide on a big merge request, you provide a bunch of nitpicks on code styles. One thing that I found really worked well for me on big merge requests is to actually open up a merge request to their merge request. Like if it's just a bunch of nitpicking code styling issues, just open a merge request to theirs, and they can like either apply the changes themselves or just merge it right in. Like that, you provide, oh, okay, just click the merge button and it's done. And works really well with what Paul said with actionable comments. So that's something that I've done a few times and I found it working really, really well.
I'm going to steal that idea, Steve. That's really great.
Yeah, I mean, that's perfect for like documentation because, you know, like most of the code is there and just create a follow-up MR for like a simple documentation change. And I've seen that done as well for some of the reviewers. And that just makes it easy for like community members. They don't have to spend another 30 minutes opening a separate MR. So that sort of provides a full service. And I mean, it doesn't happen very often, even when you have to close an MR, like as long as there's a good explanation and rationale. I haven't seen community members like react very negatively because they just want to learn. Like if there's a good reason for this not to be merged, they just want to know the reason. And you know, if you close it without any explanation, then they have right to get upset. But if you have a good rationale, then I think that just goes a long way in terms of, I mean, that's an opportunity to learn for next time. So cool. Yeah, appreciate your tips on reviewing MRs. I guess Steve, I'll stay with you. Like, I mean, can you think of like any contributions where you like learned a lot from as a reviewer yourself, like in terms of how people are using Runner or like so? Yeah.
I think every contribution makes me learn. I learn a lot from it, and not from a technical perspective as well. Like some people is like very knee deep into Docker internals, for example, right? And like we're doing a feature on Docker, and like they propose a way, hey, we should do it this way, and like I have never heard of it. Like two things I always keep in mind is. When we were working on the network per build, right? So we create a Docker network for every job that we run. There were some really technical details that, like, for example, two community contributors like actually explained to me how they work and like how they should be set up. And like I learned a lot, even how Kubernetes networking works and that. And some people are super technical on specific things, and because the runner touches a lot of different technologies, that I find it quite hard to be super technical on every one of them. So like when someone explains to me, hey, for example, this artifact thing, I had to learn about zip headers and things like that, and they spend the time explaining what zip headers are and things like that. So like I learn a ton, and every day I learn something new from the community contributions. So yes, I really, really appreciate. It's not just me mentoring them; it's them mentoring me as well at the end of the day.
Cool. So like a collaboration goes both ways for sure, right? So Laura, anything you want to add or like?
I mean, yeah, I also learned something from every contribution, and I guess it was like a little bit of a lucky thing that just as I switched teams, I got to review a community contribution for the team I'm currently on. And just through that, I was like, well, I have to like really go deep into this. So I learned a lot, which was really helpful for my current role. The MR actually ended up being closed, but just like Paul said, it's because we were, solving the problem in it was just it was actually a little bit of a misunderstanding in the documentation. So we actually ended up making some documentation changes instead to, make things more clear. But yeah, I mean, I learned a ton from that. And thanks to that, now I am training to be a maintainer for the CI templates. So that was really great.
Cool. Awesome. So it helped with your onboarding too, which is nice.
Yeah.
So,
that was awesome.
Yeah. Kerry or Paul, anything you want to add there?
Jump in. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm
It's okay.
I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead, Paul. But
I recommend all of our front end team. Lots of, after being on the team for a handful of months, they're like, okay, I want to become a maintainer of the GitLab project. I always recommend be a merge request coach, because you gain so much experience. And even if you're working in just your same domain, I love seeing everybody approach a problem differently. And that's what's so valuable working with community contributors, because you get a whole bunch of contributors, from some contributors that are 6 to 7 years old, some contributors are in university, and some contributors have deep knowledge in various areas. And even if it's something like in a domain I'm really familiar with, just the variety of approaches that there are is so valuable for me to see. And I always encourage our team members to try to get involved in reviewing community contributions, because it's like a microwave of experience in a good way.
Cool. Carrie, anything you want to add there, or any memorable MRs that you learned from, or?
Yeah, I think one of the first ones that we got in was adding X509 commit signing to commits, which I don't even use GPG commit signing. So it was a deep dive into encryption and signing things, as well as having to learn a code base from somebody who was clearly very deep knowledge in that area. But it's really wonderful. It's the community is part of our product in a way, right? We have a code base, but we also have a community, and so it's another thing that we should be tending to. And when we do, it's this amazing orchard that just rewards us over and over again.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, this reminds me, I was having a conversation with Tom Kwa, who's another backend engineer. He says that he appreciates each MR because he gets insight into how people are using our product, like the way that he didn't even think about. So that was very interesting, because he's also very active in being responsive and responding to community MRs. And he said it's been a really eye opener in a lot of cases on how customers and users are using GitLab. So I mean, last question for panel members is, I think, obviously over the past couple of years since I've been here, we've done a great job in being responsive and growing the community. But what else should we be doing to make it easier? I think, Paul, I'll start with you, because you provided a comment. It was bad on my part. I scheduled a last hackathon during the last week of leading up to the release, which is crunch time for a lot of you guys, and you rightfully called me out in a positive way, saying this is an ideal time. So we'll change that going forward. But what other things should we do better for not just for community members, but also for reviewers, and continuing to grow the community and helping with community contributions? So.
Yeah, that's a really good question. On front end, we've had a number of epics that have been broken down to really bite-sized chunks, which have been really cool, saying, wow, we can get a lot done in our code base if we have a well-defined problem. Here's a well-defined approach to it, and we have 100 issues. And it's amazing how much changes we can do at scale that way. So creating more of those epics, and just us taking the time to really well define the problem, and to the point where anticipating contributors picking up issues would be really nice. And I don't do this really well. And one area of our code base I think could use a lot of love, that I think anybody could just get started working on, are a lot of our tests, like our unit tests, especially in the front end, are using an old pattern, or could be rewritten. And you don't need the GDK set up for this. So it's very doable, but I think it's not visible that that's a problem. And just increasing the visibility and awareness of, here's some problems in our code base at specifically these files, here's how we can approach that. That's something that I personally want to do with epics and issues I open up. Emphasis on the 1, 2, and I need to do better at it.
Cool. No, I mean, you bring up a good point. That we had a couple of gold mines in the past 2 to 3 hackathons, especially on front ends. I think it was so well broken down. I mean, basically all the issues are just low hanging fruits because the way it was organized and broken down. And I think the last one, like within a day, all the issues in the epics were closed. So kudos to the front end team, and want to replicate that with the back end as well, to make it easy. So what about rest of you, Steve, Laura, or Carrie? Anything else that you can think of that we can do better going forward?
One thing that I'm still struggling with when I review a community contribution is like how much to comment on the code quality and how much to comment on networking, right? And I've been doing some research on other community contribution on other projects. Like one thing that really struck me is the Webpack project. Basically, the maintainers of the Webpack team, Webpack project, they basically just merged the PR as it is, and then they open up a follow-up pull request to fix all the code quality things and things like that on their own time, doing their own standards. That is good and bad because sometimes a community contributor wants to learn the coding standards and wants to learn stuff. So I think having a way to tell the user that, hey, the contribution, hey, do you want to like continue contributing to this, like fixing it up properly and things like that, or is it okay if we just merge it and we fix it on our own time? It's a give or take. Sometimes you end up incurring technical debt without realizing, because then you have to jump on to the next important thing. But I think we have been discussing this in an issue on the runner team about what we can do to improve community contributions. I'll leave it in the chat. One other idea that we had was having some kind of bot that pastes a comment as soon as the community contributions open up, like giving you links to where our code review guidelines are and things like that. And there's something I ripped off from the Kubernetes community. Basically, when I opened up a merge request, there was a bot that just posted a bunch of links. I know it was a bot, but it was still very helpful for me. Like, hey, it was acknowledged in a way, and I started reading up on more of the processes about the Kubernetes community. And like, if we have that bot, maybe we can incur this, like, hey, do you want to continue improving the code on this one, or do you just want it merged and fixed, and then we'll handle the code quality on our own time? So those are the two ideas that I can think of at the moment. But yeah, like trying to communicate more with the contributor what their end goal is very, very beneficial.
We already sort of do this, but I think I could be better at. I think what's really great is our labels. I haven't really seen this in other open source projects, but we have a label that's like good for first-time contributors. And I have to remember sometimes that there are a lot of follow-up issues that I create or things that I can create that I can label as that. Because I think that's kind of like a really easy and like, I don't know, kind way to start contributing to our code base. And we have a lot of awesome ways to do that. You know, we also have front end, back end, all that stuff. But specifically the first-time contributor label, I think it's important. And I can already think of like a bunch of issues that I could apply that to. So maybe I'll do that after this call. But yeah, I think we could improve it.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, we're actually, go ahead, sorry.
Also setting the weight. I learned this the hard way. Some contributor found an issue and I was like, how in the world did you find this issue? And they do a search based on the weight. And if we don't weight something, it doesn't show up in the search. So that was another, and thanks for bringing that reminder, Laura, because I forget about those weights and labels. So maybe making it almost a requirement for follow-up issues that we create would be a good idea. Rather than just opting it in, making an explicit decision, I have to give this a weight, or I have to say, is this good or not? As a reminder, probably in that issue description would be helpful.
Cool. Carrie, any other suggestions or?
Everybody picked what I was going to say. It's really just like how do we surface things in a way so that they can be discoverable to people who are looking for things to do, as well as making sure that people understand the process and what to expect. And I really like that idea of having a bot that says, here's some really important, interesting docs to read. I think that's a really interesting idea.
Cool. All right. So, and thanks, Steve, for linking the issue on the chat. So those are all the questions I had. Like, I don't know if the audience members have any questions. Like, I haven't seen anything on chat. Like, I mean, John, I'm not sure if we want to open up. Like, I mean, I need to thank everybody for staying with us. We had some Zoom bomb incidents earlier, and thanks, John, for blocking those people and people for staying around. So I don't know if you want to open up for questions, or John, I'll leave it up to you. But.
Yeah, let me reiterate what Ray said. Thank you to our presenters and Ray for keeping your cool through those disruptions. And thank you everyone for staying with us through that. Definitely never Googled so fast how to react to Zoom bombing. So we'll make sure to kind of address some of those security gaps in the future to try and avoid future disruptions. But I do think that we were able to remove most of the bad actors. So if anybody has questions, I welcome them in the chat. And if not, we can wrap things up as we're almost at time.
Well, and then it looks like there's a question.
Chat, so.
Yeah. So one question from Gilong, and any one of the panelists can take this. How does a community contributor get involved in important features? Is a task planning live stream publicly or recorded? And we have lots of video on, like, especially on Filter channel, a lot of team meetings and office hours are posted, but I don't know, like, other panelists want to add anything there, but.
I can add a few things.
Yeah.
I've been pinged on multiple direction and feature issues. Like, hey, I'm really interested in picking this up. Like, can I pick this up? And like, if you just ask if you can pick it up, and you want to pick it up, like, I would say 99.9% would be yes. The other way to figure out, to discuss something is multiple teams run office hours. So for example, my team run office hours per month, where anyone in the community can join into Zoom and we'll discuss any community contribution and things like that. And if you want to join there and discuss a specific feature, even if you're just thinking of starting working on it, that would be really, really helpful, because then you can get a lot of context from us having a one-to-one synchronous communication.
Cool. And then I'll take the question from Jeremy. Do you think having more North Star epics or directional docs would help community contributions align with direction and contribution resources? Yeah, I think this is similar to, like, Paul, that what you talked about. We need to do a better job of sort of surfacing, and Laura, you too, like surfacing or highlighting some of the issues or epics. That's actually something that I want to work with some of the teams this quarter to, especially before hackathon, just do a better job of highlighting these. Even if you don't do these during a hackathon, here are the things that's easy to sort of filter through. Because if you search through issues right now, they're like 28,000 or some awfully large numbers. So, Paul, I don't know if you have anything else to add there or not about on Jeremy's question, but.
Yeah, I've seen a number of community contributors pick up. It's usually issues that don't have a milestone attached to it. So if a community contributor is looking for, I'd like to do something in the web IDE, looking for that feature, or somehow also making it very visible what stage a feature is on, because I think that's something that's we internal to the GitLab team are aware of, oh, this is in this slice of the product, and so we label our issues that way. But that's another thing that's probably a little mysterious to the outside community, is I'm interested in these kind of features. How do I find that? And that's there. It's labeled in a certain stage, but it's that information might not be as visible. But looking at backlog based on the milestone is great. When I've been pinged to just ask, some people say, hey, do you have any other MRs or issues I could hop on? I usually look for milestone backlog. Because I think contributors like contributing to something that's very visible too, and so that's been a that's a bit of a challenge because a lot of those are a little bit non-trivial. So the other huge recommendation I'd make, it's in our handbook. Try to get a code review as soon as there's code to review. A lot of contributors feel like, oh, what I have isn't good enough. Like even just whatever you have, like let's just start collaborating on it and trying to build that community culture, contribution culture is huge. Trying to change it from more of like a is your code good enough review to a collaboration experience, because then we can just get started. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I think there's a question from Justin that we probably won't have time to address regarding epics or milestones, but since we're out of time. But if you want to follow up more questions, I pasted a link to the Gitter channel. I mean, I'm usually there most of the time while working, so just post your questions there. Apologies for not getting to them, but yeah, and thanks, Paul, Steve, Laura, and Carrie for being an awesome panelist. I really enjoyed it, and I guess John, I'll turn things over to you to wrap things up.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Once we got past the bumpy start, I think it wound up being a great discussion. So I really appreciate all your time, and thanks to the folks who kind of came and listened and asked questions. And I think we all can. Everyone from the GitLab team looks forward to seeing contributions from many of you in the future and collaborating with you on issues and merge requests and on Gitter. So let's keep the lines of communication open. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, John.